Wife insists on handing out surprise pets at our son's party, ignoring the parents' horror while planning another fiasco. I'm a 32-year-old guy, and every year, my wife and I host our son's birthday party at our home. I usually leave most of the planning to her. She absolutely loves orchestrating events like this and really enjoys having full control. I never had any reason to doubt her ideas. In previous years, our parties have gone off without a hitch. The kids always had fun, and I took care of little details like inviting guests and placing food orders whenever she needed me. This year, she once again worked her magic. Everything was seamless. The games, the decorations, the cake, nothing could have gone better. But then, as the cake plates were still clinking and everyone was getting ready to head home, things took a bizarre turn. Our good friend needed to leave early with her daughter, and just as she was almost out the door, my wife dashed into the back room with a mysterious grin on her face. She returned holding a bag. I had no idea what was inside. She opened the bag and handed out its treasure to our friend's daughter, a tiny tetra fish in a plastic bag, straight from the pet store. My friend was absolutely floored. Her daughter's eyes lit up, ecstatic at her unexpected gift. "Mommy, I've always wanted a fish," she cried. But her mom just stared at me in utter disbelief. Without much more than a terse shake of the head, my friend politely refused the fish. They walked out the door, her daughter wailing, inconsolable, desperate not to leave her new pet behind. In what felt like seconds, news of the fish spread through the room like wildfire. Suddenly, every child was clamoring for a bag of their own, and the parents looked like they were about ready to mutiny. Some shot daggers at me, others whispered anxiously to their spouses. What are we supposed to tell our kids? Now we have to buy a fish tank? The tension was palpable, but my wife only seemed to see the sea of thrilled faces among the kids. She handed out fish after fish, blissfully unaware of the horrified expressions on parents' faces. Unsurprisingly, a few parents just flat out said no and left the fish with us. That meant I had the pleasure of bringing home several new, unwanted fish, and we had to go out and buy our own tank just to keep them alive. My wife was incredulous, baffled as to why anyone would turn down a wonderful, 50-cent fish she'd picked up that morning. Fast forward to now, a whole year later. Our son's 8th birthday is looming, and as we start planning, my wife's eyes light up as she asks, "Should we give out fish again?" The kids loved it, it was such a hit last year. My blood ran cold. I absolutely do not want a repeat of last year's aquatic fiasco. A few of my friends, the ones who actually survived last year's party, are still sore about the whole ordeal. They told me, bluntly, that they hated being put in that situation, pressured to take home an unwanted pet just to avoid disappointing their child. Some even said if we did it again they wouldn't come at all. Plus, it feels downright cruel to the fish, thrust into homes where they aren't wanted, destined for a short, troubled life. My wife, though, won't hear it. She brushes off my concerns and insists the only thing that matters is the happiness of the children. She claims the parents are being selfish for not putting the kids' feelings first. Apparently, she only saw laughter and excitement at the last party, totally missing the storm brewing behind the parents' forced smiles. She accuses me of being controlling, and now, she's threatening to bow out of planning the party entirely if she can't have her way. To make things more complicated, all her close church friends back her up completely. I'm stuck between not wanting to alienate our friends with another round of surprise pets, and not wanting to take away something my wife genuinely loves, organizing these parties. But I can't get rid of the feeling that she's missing the bigger picture, and that if I let this happen again, it'll be a disaster for everyone, fish included. Update 1. Yesterday was my son's birthday, and I want to share how everything turned out after all the chaos leading up to it. I decided to take some solid advice and finally talk things out with my wife, especially leaning on a lot of the points about animal abuse that made so much sense to me. But every time I tried to reason with her, she accused me of being controlling. Eventually, she simply shut down, walked away, and gave me the silent treatment. Let me tell you, this isn't the first time something like this has happened. While the party drama was new, the behavior behind it was unfortunately all too familiar. She's backed out of multiple parties and events last minute, just because she didn't feel like going. Whenever I told her I'd still like to go, she'd turn around and accuse me of abandoning her. She insisted I stop playing guitar because she finds it annoying, and at one point, she even showed up to a wedding in a swimsuit because she heard there'd be a pool, and then spent the entire reception swimming, dismissing any celebration since they were my friends, not hers. Even when our son was being bullied and I pushed to get him into a new school, she resisted because she didn't want to cause a scene. Thankfully, our son is at a better school now and is so much happier. I was fed up. I couldn't let my son go through this, nor was I about to let him lose friends because of my wife's selfish decisions. I followed her around the house, trying to get her to talk to me. Eventually, she snapped, "Fine, if you want it your way, you can plan this party yourself." So, I did exactly that. From there, I took over the planning, outside of the invitations, date, and location, which had already been decided. My wife demanded to pick out the cake, and honestly, that wasn't a battle worth fighting for me. I threw myself into the theme, Jurassic Park. My son and I had just watched the whole series together, and he's obsessed with dinosaurs. I themed each table around a different dinosaur, scattered little plastic dinosaurs everywhere, and put together some Simple candy bags as party favors. The kids might not have been bouncing off the walls, but they were happy, and my son was absolutely thrilled. Best of all, no fish were harmed in the making of this party. Afterward, my wife kept going on about how lame everything was, complaining that the party was boring and that the kids weren't bouncing off the walls over my candy party favors the way they did over hers. But honestly, I don't care. Sure, the party favors weren't live animals, but at least I didn't risk our friendships or my son's social life with such a reckless decision. Truly, I have no clue where things are going between my wife and me at this point. I feel like I'm reaching the end of my rope with her. I've tried to insist on marriage counseling, but she demanded it be done by our church's pastor. We went, but the whole session was just the pastor telling me I wasn't good enough for her, that I was turning away from God and ruining our marriage. We never went back, and now my wife loves to throw that session in my face whenever we argue. I loved her. But every day, it gets harder to keep feeling that way. I can't stand the idea of my son growing up believing this is what a happy marriage looks like, that this is how a healthy life is supposed to be lived. Divorce scares the hell out of me, but at this point, I don't know how much longer I can live like this. Update 2. To make a long story short, we've decided to get divorced. But to make a short story long, here's how we reached that point. I took a lot of consideration from the opinions of people around me about my marriage, and the reality of divorce and abuse. Over the years, I endured a lot of immaturity from my wife, but constantly convinced myself that I was in the wrong. From the outside, it might be obvious to see that I was trapped in a bad situation, but when you're in it, you don't realize how much unhealthy behavior becomes your new normal. The infamous fish story, honestly, was just the last straw. A few weeks ago, we went on vacation to Georgia, staying with my wife's parents. If you need perspective on how manipulated I've been throughout this marriage, just know that my in-laws take their daughter's side on every single disagreement. They once even sat me down to lecture me about not making enough money, saying their daughter deserves not to work, and that a good husband should take his wife to Disneyland every year. Their values are deeply woven into church culture, so much so that my wife relies on her faith community and friends for every single bit of advice. There was a moment during the trip when we all went out to Cracker Barrel. My mother-in-law and father-in-law didn't exchange a single word, they just stared at their phones or the menu in icy silence. The air was thick with discomfort. Sitting there, it hit me like a tidal wave, that coldness, that apathy, that was exactly what my wife and I had become. And if I stayed, that was our future. It wasn't going to get better. I excused myself to the bathroom and let it all out. I broke down and cried. None of this was about the stupid fish or her defiant decisions, like wearing a swimsuit to a wedding. I realized I wasn't happy. I'd been gaslit endlessly, blamed for everything, and forced to live in a marriage that was nothing but emotional abuse. My wife wouldn't take no for an answer. If she didn't get her way, I was instantly a horrible monster. Later that night, I told her I wasn't happy in our marriage. Maybe I shouldn't have dropped that bomb during vacation, but I had to get it off my chest. She admitted she wasn't happy either, but kept repeating the line that we should try harder, that we had to stay together for our son. I asked her what we could do to fix things, and she just said, "I don't know, I don't want to talk about this right now." That was it. No answers, no effort, just avoidance. We let the subject drop and went to bed. For the rest of the trip, we barely said a word about it. We spent more and more time apart. I'd take my son for walks or hikes that my wife wanted nothing to do with. When all three of us watched movies together, it was just a performance, trying to keep up appearances for our son's sake. It was miserable, but I think my son still managed to enjoy himself. A couple days after we got home, my mom called me in tears. She wanted to know what was going on in my marriage. Apparently, my wife had called her and vented relentlessly, painting me as the villain. She told my mom I demanded sex. Completely false. In reality, our intimacy was almost non-existent, and any attempt at connection was immediately shut down, never even discussed, that I didn't make enough for her to be a stay-at-home mom, never mind that she hates cooking and cleaning. I genuinely have no idea what she'd do at home all day, and that I was controlling. I reassured my mom as best I could. She said she understood why I'd behaved the way I had in the marriage, but that phone call essentially shattered the last ties between my wife and my family, and marked the true end of our marriage. I confronted my wife. There was no big dramatic scene. I was just empty. Done. I felt hollow, nothing left. I looked her in the eye and said, "This is not how you treat someone you love. Do you even love me?" She stopped for a long moment and finally said, "No. I honestly don't love you." I couldn't deny that feeling anymore either. So I ended it then and there. "Fine. We're getting a divorce." She shrugged and just said, "That's your decision. If that's what you want." That was that. We haven't started the legal process yet, but we're moving toward it. I'm sleeping on the couch. She's already staked her claim to all the pets, except the fish, of course. We sat down with our son to tell him, and his reaction was heartbreakingly wise. "It's okay. I knew it was going to happen soon." He's only 8, but incredibly mature, and I'm so grateful he understands. We promised him we both love him deeply and that, no matter what changes, we'll do everything to make this as painless as possible for him. And as for her church? I discovered her big secret. She was sleeping with the pastor. Just kidding. The reality of our church dynamic is a story in itself. I used to be deeply religious and went to church with my wife. When I started openly questioning my faith, she got so furious, angrier than I'd ever seen. She even tried to hit me. When I blocked her arm, she screamed that I was putting my hands on her and tried to take our son and leave. At that time, our boy was only 4. I wouldn't let her take him, so she stormed off alone. My wife then told all our friends at church that I was some sort of monster. They began urging her to call the police on me. She never did, but that's what she said they wanted. After all that, I wouldn't go back to Church A and later joined Church B, which she tagged along to, as Church A held no appeal without me. But we left Church B because of terrible leadership, shady finances, and how poorly they treated our son. She insisted we return to Church A. I tried, but the community iced me out completely. Not a single friend from Church A ever reached out to see if I was alright, or even to ask if her version of events was true. I stopped going to church altogether. She didn't. Now, they've excommunicated me in all but name, and I never intend to speak to any of them again. It's a long road ahead, but I'm grateful to finally be doing what I need to in order to find happiness and freedom from this marriage. Update 3. Well, I never thought I'd be back here with another update, but life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It's been about 2 months since I last posted, and let me just say, things have gotten complicated in ways I never saw coming. First, the divorce proceedings started, and they were going about as smoothly as you'd expect with my wife involved. She demanded the house, full custody, and half my retirement savings. I was prepared for a fight, but what I wasn't prepared for was what happened 3 weeks ago. My son came home from his weekend with his mom looking upset. When I asked what was wrong, he hesitated before saying, "Dad, why was Pastor Mike sleeping over at Mom's house?" My blood went cold. I tried to stay calm and asked him to tell me more. Apparently, Pastor Mike from Church A, the same church that basically excommunicated me, had been visiting a lot lately. My son said he saw him coming out of Mom's bedroom in the morning wearing just his underwear. I'll be honest, part of me wasn't even surprised. The way her church friends rallied around her so quickly, the way she was so adamant about going back to Church A, and especially how that marriage counseling session went down, it all started making sense. But I needed proof before I could do anything about it. I started paying attention to patterns. Every time she had our son on weekends, she'd text me about needing to run errands or having church meetings that ran late. I began documenting everything, taking screenshots of her messages, noting times and dates. I even drove by the house a few times during her custody days. Sure enough, there was Pastor Mike's silver Camry in my old driveway. The breaking point came last week. My son called me crying on a Tuesday night, not his usual night with me. He said Mom and Pastor Mike were fighting loudly, and he was scared. I was there in 10 minutes. When I knocked, it took forever for someone to answer. My wife finally opened the door looking disheveled, claiming they were just having a prayer session and that my son was being dramatic. But here's where it gets really interesting. As I was leaving with my son, I noticed something that made my heart skip: Pastor Mike's wedding ring sitting on the kitchen counter. That's right, this man of God is married. Has been for 15 years, with 3 kids of his own. I couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Pastor Mike's wife, Sarah. I'd met her a few times at church events before everything went south. The conversation was awkward at first, but when I gently mentioned seeing her husband's car at my wife's house frequently, the line went quiet for a long time. "I've been wondering where he's been going," she finally whispered. "He says he's been doing extensive counseling with troubled church members, staying out until all hours." I thought it was admirable. We agreed to meet for coffee the next day. Sarah brought photos from her husband's phone that she'd found, screenshots of text messages between him and my wife that were definitely not appropriate for a pastor and a troubled parishioner. Messages talking about how they couldn't keep doing this but couldn't stay away from each other. There were even plans for a weekend getaway they'd taken while I thought my wife was visiting her sister in Atlanta. The most damning evidence? A message from my wife saying, "I can't wait until both our divorces are final so we can stop sneaking around." Turns out, Pastor Mike had been telling his wife he was thinking about leaving the ministry and that their marriage had been struggling. Sound familiar? He'd been setting the stage for months, just like my wife had been painting me as the villain to justify her actions. Sarah and I decided to confront them together. We showed up at my old house yesterday morning, both armed with printed screenshots and a whole lot of righteous anger. My wife answered the door in a robe, at 11 a.m., and you should have seen her face when she saw Sarah standing next to me. The confrontation was explosive. My wife immediately went into denial mode, claiming Pastor Mike was just helping her through her abusive marriage, her words. But when Sarah started reading the text messages out loud, particularly the one about the way you touched me during prayer was so inappropriate, but I loved it, my wife's story fell apart completely. Pastor Mike tried to hide in the bedroom, but Sarah marched right in there and dragged him out. Watching this respected church leader, the same man who told me I wasn't good enough for my wife, standing there in his boxers trying to explain away months of adultery was almost satisfying enough to make up for everything I'd been through. The aftermath has been swift and brutal. Sarah filed for divorce that same day and immediately contacted the church board. By evening, Pastor Mike had been asked to step down from his position. The church is in complete chaos, half the congregation is in denial, the other half is demanding answers. My wife's precious support system has completely crumbled overnight. As for the legal implications, this changes everything. My lawyer is ecstatic. Adultery might not be a big deal in no-fault divorce states, but proving that my wife was planning her affair while making false accusations against me, particularly the domestic violence claims she made to her church friends, gives us serious leverage. Her demands for the house and full custody just became a lot less realistic. My son, bless him, has been handling this better than the adults involved. When I explained that mom had been lying about a lot of things and that's why we can't live together anymore, he just nodded and said, "I know, Dad. I'm not stupid." This kid continues to amaze me with his maturity. The strangest part? I actually feel sorry for Pastor Mike's kids. They didn't ask for any of this, and now their family is destroyed because their father couldn't keep it in his pants. Sarah and I have been texting throughout this whole ordeal, not in a romantic way, just two people helping each other navigate the wreckage of our marriages. She's a good person who deserved none of this. My wife, on the other hand, has gone full scorched earth. She's been calling my family, trying to convince them that I set her up and that the affair was just her way of coping with my emotional abuse. Thankfully, my mom saw right through it, especially after that phone call fiasco from before. The irony isn't lost on me that the woman who insisted on keeping fish as party favors, claiming she just wanted to make children happy, turned out to be someone who'd destroy multiple families, including her own, for her selfish desires. At least the fish only had to suffer for a few weeks. I'm not going to lie and say I'm not angry. I'm furious. But I'm also relieved. For months, I thought I was losing my mind, that maybe I really was the controlling, abusive husband she claimed I was. Finding out that she'd been cheating this whole time, manipulating our entire church community, and planning her exit strategy while making me out to be the villain, it's validating in the most painful way possible. The divorce should move much faster now. I'm confident I'll get primary custody, and honestly, given how this all played out, I'm not sure my wife will even fight for it. Her whole identity was wrapped up in being the perfect Christian wife and mother. Now that everyone knows the truth, I think she just wants to disappear. As for me, I'm focusing on my son and trying to rebuild. We're looking at houses in a different school district, a fresh start for both of us. And yes, we're definitely planning his next birthday party together. No fish this time, I promise. Sometimes the trash really does take itself out. Update 4. I honestly thought I was done updating this saga, but life apparently had other plans. It's been about 6 weeks since the whole Pastor Mike bombshell exploded, and just when I thought things were settling into a new normal, everything went sideways again. The divorce was moving along smoothly, my lawyer wasn't kidding about having leverage. My wife had basically given up fighting for the house or primary custody. She'd been laying low, staying with her parents, and I figured she was just trying to wait out the storm until she could start fresh somewhere else. My son and I had found a great little house across town, and he was actually excited about the move and starting at a new school in the fall. But then, 2 weeks ago, I got a call that changed everything. It was Sarah, Pastor Mike's wife. We'd been checking in with each other periodically, mostly just venting about the legal proceedings and how our kids were handling everything. But this call was different. Her voice was shaking. "You need to know something about your wife," she said. Mike finally started talking, trying to save his own skin, and there's more. A lot more. Apparently, in his desperation to minimize his role in their affair, Pastor Mike had been spilling details to anyone who'd listen, his lawyer, the church board, even Sarah. And according to him, my wife had been feeding him information about our marriage for over 2 years, long before their affair even started. She'd been painting me as controlling and abusive from the very beginning, laying the groundwork for her eventual exit strategy. But here's the kicker, she'd also been skimming money from our joint accounts. Small amounts at first, maybe $50 or $100 here and there that I'd attributed to normal spending. But over time, it had escalated. Sarah said Mike admitted that my wife had been funneling money to him under the guise of church donations, which he'd then been giving back to her in cash for their secret getaways and who knows what else. We're talking about thousands of dollars that I never knew were missing. I immediately called my lawyer and accountant. Sure enough, when we did a deep dive into our finances, we found a pattern of donations to the church that were way higher than what I remembered agreeing to. My wife had been handling most of our bill paying, so I trusted her when she said we were giving our usual tithe. In reality, she'd been bleeding our savings dry. The financial betrayal hit me harder than the affair, honestly. I could wrap my head around someone falling out of love and making terrible decisions, but the calculated way she'd been stealing from our family, from our son's future, that was a whole different level of betrayal. But the story gets worse. Last week, my son came home from his court-ordered visit with his mom looking upset again. I've learned to pay attention to these moments, so I sat him down and asked what was wrong. "Dad, why does mom keep crying and saying we need to move away? She said we might have to go live with grandma and grandpa in Georgia permanently." My blood ran cold. Georgia? Where her parents live. A state where I'd have virtually no chance of maintaining meaningful custody of my son. I called my lawyer immediately. Turns out, My wife had been quietly applying for jobs in Georgia and had even put a deposit down on an apartment near her parents. She was planning to take my son and disappear across state lines, hoping that by the time I found out, it would be too late to stop her. The emergency custody hearing was yesterday. My lawyer presented all the evidence: the financial theft, the affair, the secret relocation plans, even the fact that she'd been badmouthing me to our 8-year-old son about the supposed move. The judge was not pleased. My wife showed up to court looking like she hadn't slept in days, with some bargain basement lawyer who clearly wasn't prepared for what we'd uncovered. When the judge asked her to explain the Georgia apartment deposit, she actually tried to claim it was for a potential future visit with her parents. The judge asked why a visit would require a year-long lease and a security deposit. She had no answer. The ruling was swift: I got temporary full custody, and she's now restricted from taking our son outside the state without court approval. Her visitation was reduced to supervised visits only, at least until the divorce is finalized. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that my son was safe, but sadness that it had come to this. The woman I'd married, who I'd once loved deeply, had become someone I barely recognized, someone willing to steal from her own family and uproot her child's life just to avoid facing the consequences of her actions. My son took the news about the custody change surprisingly well. "Does this mean I don't have to move to Georgia?" he asked. When I told him he'd be staying with me, he just nodded and said, "Good. I like my friends here, and Georgia is hot." Sometimes I forget he's only 8. His ability to roll with these massive life changes continues to amaze me. The financial investigation is ongoing. We've uncovered almost $8,000 in suspicious transfers and cash withdrawals over the past 18 months. My lawyer thinks we might be able to recover some of it, but honestly, at this point I just want it all to be over. My wife's parents called me last night, the first time they'd spoken to me since this all started. Her father was actually apologetic, saying they had no idea she'd been planning to move to Georgia or about the money situation. Her mother was quieter, but I could hear the disappointment in her voice when she asked, "What happened to our daughter?" I didn't have an answer for that. I've been asking myself the same question for months. The strangest part of all this? I found out yesterday that Pastor Mike is trying to reconcile with Sarah. Apparently, he's been begging her to take him back, claiming my wife seduced him and that he was just a victim of her manipulation. Sarah told me she laughed in his face and hung up on him. "Some people never learn," she said when she told me about it. "At least we both know better now." She's right. We do know better. And my son and I are building something new and honest, without lies or manipulation or secret fish parties that ruin friendships. The divorce should be final within the next month. After that, I'm hoping life can finally start to feel normal again. My son starts at his new school in the fall. We're painting his new bedroom his favorite color, dinosaur green, apparently, and for the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. No more updates planned, but then again, I've said that before. Ria Sayer.